It's really the idea that mind and body are separate that is so wrong and so incorrect. And we're taught that by our culture, and we learn practices that sort of reinforce that separation. But the separation was never real in a sense, So as I said, that flow of internal sensations is always there. We just kind of need to have the skill and the awareness to tune into it.
The other thing that I just want you to pick up on is that the body knows before the mind, and that the mind is inherently restricted in its capacity to actually make sense of certain situations, because it can only process a certain amount of pieces of information, and the heuristics, the biases that it employs to make those decisions quickly mean that it has a fundamental limitation, whereas the body is not constrained. It is processing a much vaster amount of information, and it knows more accurately and more unfiltered. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's really fascinating research too. Originally launched by Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, who did this classic experiment involving decks of cards in which participants were asked to turn over cards from and choose from which decks to turn over cards and try to, maximize their wins and minimize their losses. What they didn't know was that 2 decks were good, they had lots of rewards, and 2 decks were bad, meaning they held lots of penalties. And as they were playing this game, their skin conductance was being measured. That's a measure of their nervous system arousal. And what's so fascinating is that their nervous systems started flaring with arousal after just a few seconds of play, and realizing the body seemed to realize on some level that some decks were good and some decks were bad. But it took many, many more turns for the players in this experiment to consciously identify, like, oh, I think these are the lucky decks and these are the unlucky ones. But their bodies were actually registering an awareness of this before their conscious minds were. And one more important piece of information that came from a subsequent study was that those people who had more interoceptive awareness, in other words, they were more attuned to their bodies, they made better choices in this game. So I think that's a beautiful illustration of how, yes, the body sort of catches on more quickly than the brain because of the limits of conscious thought. And it also appears to be that the body is sometimes more rational than the conscious mind, which I love, because we've been told through centuries of Western culture that the body is irrational and the mind is this pure, rational, realm of cerebral activity. But it turns out that, as we know from the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and all those cognitive scientists who have pointed out how many cognitive biases and heuristics the conscious brain uses, the body isn't hampered or hobbled by those, so it can actually act in a more rational and less constrained fashion than the brain and its conscious processing.